Welcome to Daniel Jákli, who is a doctoral candidate at the Johannes Gutenberg University of Mainz and scholarship holder of the German National Academic Foundation. He did research staged in Wyoming in 1922-24, so a lot of research, and his lecture I have announced already. It's your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much. Even in 2019 I was already in Wyoming, but then COVID hit, and so I had to stay in Germany for 2 years. Thank you very much for the invitation and the introduction. Just short, what I do in my PhD, I look at American conservatism from a culture-oriented perspective, and I look at how it works in everyday life, and I look at practices which are very common in Wyoming, like ranching, rodeo, and hunting. So that's where I spent most of my research. I worked on a ranch, attended a lot of rodeos, and went hunting. In the daily activities of the people, to understand American conservatism from a lesser political viewpoint, but more, from an everyday life perspective. So when I start, that's my presentation, Survival of the Fittest, the Reproduction of Social Darwinist Values in American Rodeo. And I start with a little story. So in June 2022, I attended a rodeo Bible camp in Wyoming as part of my research. One of the organizers asked me to take photos, and of course I agreed, since it was a great opportunity to get more into the field. A few days later, I found myself at the edge of the dusty arena under the hot Wyoming sun, watching a group of kids train for bull and bronc horse riding. In the morning, they practiced basic movements on dummies, focusing on body tension and mental preparation. In the afternoon, things got serious. One after another, they mounted a steer, bull, or bronc, often being thrown off within seconds. So apart from the fact that they didn't seem to be too afraid to expose themselves to such dangers, I was particularly impressed by how quickly these children got back on their feet after a painful fall. But the coaches were also strict. If somebody didn't get up quickly enough, they were pulled to their feet. The reasoning was simple, what people told me. The arena is never a safe place to stay. So here I have some pictures from this camp, and you can see the different disciplines. So the first above there, the bull riding, and then the bronc horse riding, and then on the left you can see one of the kids. There are even younger kids participating than this one, with a little bit painful face, But during the breaks, I realized that there was more than just safety. The coaches and some of the other participants shared stories about their own experiences, how they overcame injuries and setbacks, often attributing their strength to God. The underlying message was always the same: life is tough, and to succeed you have to be even tougher. That's why rodeo, for many of these people I've met during my research, is more than just a sport. It's a way of life and a school of life where essential values like toughness, self-reliance, and competition are taught and even embodied. So that wasn't in purpose. So that's my outline for now. In the following, I will first trace how key conservative values in rodeo, such as toughness, self-reliance, and competition, are historically rooted in social Darwinism and the American frontier myth. And then I will then show how these values are embodied by participants through constant repetition. Finally, I will offer some reflections of the intersection of rodeo and Trumpism. This will serve to connect my presentation to current political developments in the US and illustrate how certain rodeos became some kind of identity performances. Social Darwinism is based on the idea that natural laws like survival of the fittest also apply to human societies. The concept coined by Herbert Spencer suggests that social progress results from competition where the fittest individuals, whether through physical strength or economic success, prevail. In the American context, these ideas gained traction mainly through Theodore Roosevelt at the end of the 19th century. Roosevelt linked social Darwinism to the frontier myth. He saw the West as a place where the natural law and natural selection still operated freely, fostering iron values like courage, independence, and competition. But for Roosevelt, competition was not just an individual challenge, but equally important for society to prosper and to prevent it from becoming soft. So furthermore, competition is necessary, or was necessary, to create a social hierarchy and a natural aristocracy. So Roosevelt's ideas can be seen as an early expression of American conservatism, often echoed today in the focus on conservatists on individualism. Somehow it goes automatically, I don't know. Another key figure in spreading these ideas was Buffalo Bill Cody. You can see him here. I guess a lot of, maybe some people know him by name. So Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows romanticized frontier life, portraying especially cowboys as a symbol of toughness and independence. These shows, which toured through the US and even parts of Europe, laid part of the foundation for today's rodeos, turning working skills of the cowboys into public spectacle and moral narrative. The other foundational element of rodeo, the working skills, came from the cattle industry. Specifically the so-called cowboy contests. These were competitive events where a cowboy tested their skills during downtime or leisure time on the range. The combination of these working practice and stage performances, so the Wild West shows, became a key element of rodeo culture, blending competition and spectacle. So before I continue, let me briefly explain rodeo a little bit more for those who might not be so familiar with it. So rodeo is called a sport, and it's very popular in the US, especially in rural areas. And the sport involves both human and animals. And there are different disciplines during this event. So there's team roping, so roping events, we call that lasso in German, calf wrestling, barrel racing, and most prominently bull riding and bronc horse riding. And the winners receive prize money. So what is interesting is also that also the animals in bull riding and bronc horse riding receive points. So even they are somehow drawn into the social Darwinist challenge. And of course, and that is of course also an important point, rodeo is often criticized by animal welfare organizations. Animals' injuries are quite common, and sometimes animals even die during the events. So the human-animal relationship is also something I write a lot in my dissertation, but it's a very complex and interesting topic, but since I don't have much time, but I'm very happy to answer questions to that later. But let's move on to the human side again. As I mentioned earlier, the values demonstrated in rodeo are deeply embodied by the participants. Rodeo values like toughness, resilience, and competition are not just discursively learned, they are physically inscribed through repetitive practice and what contestants often call muscle memory. So, similar to what the French sociologist Louis Vacan describes in the context of boxing, the boundaries between body and mind, between physical skills and moral capacities become blurred in rodeo. Vacan emphasizes that physical practices and mental structures are closely intertwined and shaped by social context, where the body itself becomes an instrument of social learning and moral expression. The body becomes a carrier of these social values inscribed through constant repetition and practice. Here you can see also how they practice on these dummies, and I like very much the buckle you can see, which says pain is a temporary, victory lasts forever, so that brings it to the point a little bit. So, and there are very different dummies and techniques, so So there they learn these muscle memory through constant repetition and doing the same movements all the time. However, rodeo participants often talk about body and mind as separate entities and how they train these two aspects independently. On the one hand, they focus on building muscle memory through constant repetition, ensuring that their body reacts instinctively without conscious thought. As Shane Proctor, a world champion bull rider, explained to me, if you start thinking, you're already lost. So contestants told me often that when they do their first rides, they black out completely, so they can't remember anything what happened. So, and they have to overcome these blackouts and slowly get used to this fast action, and that's why they train these movements all the time, so that it gets natural for them. On the other hand, they emphasize the importance of the mental game, the mindset needed to stay focused, confident, and resilient, even in the face of fear, pain, and failure. As one of the coaches put it, it's not just about cowboy ability. You can get the physical ability, but it's about mental toughness. Are you able to get bucked off and get back up and go? So that's why many riders also adopt mental strategies such as meditation, focus training, and visualization techniques to prepare for competition. So yet, even though they say they train it separately, the mental and the physical dimensions are deeply intertwined. This connection becomes most evident when riders face injuries. They must assess whether they are merely hurt, something they can push through, so like with bruises, abrasions, or sore muscles, or they are seriously injured, then they need rest and recovery, like when they break bones, or they have a concussion, or they tore ACL or something. So pain, therefore, is the point where body and mind converge. It reveals how the physical capacity to endure hardship and the mental determination to persist are not separate, but inherently linked. Therefore, in rodeo, pain is not just a physical sensation, it also becomes a moral challenge, a test of character and willpower. The ability to endure discomfort without complaint is seen as a marker of toughness and personal responsibility, and complaining is viewed as weakness. So, and honestly, something I really witnessed very rarely, because when they, come from the arena or get out of the arena, and they go straight to their equipment and don't talk with anybody, even if you can see they have really much pain, but nobody goes to them and asks how they feel or something. So they have to deal with that on their own. So but of course there's a downside of that all. While the conservative values and the survival of the fittest is celebrated in rodeo, the reality for participants is often quite harsh. Despite the presence of a strong rodeo community, most rodeo athletes are independent entrepreneurs, meaning they are largely on their own. Since prize money is only awarded for winning, their livelihood is quite precarious. Many live in cars, trailers, or cheap motels, constantly touring across the US from rodeo to rodeo. To cut costs, they often team up with other contestants, sharing rides and expenses. So one of the biggest challenges, and you can see that here already, is the lack of adequate health insurance. Despite the fact that in rodeo it's not a question of if you get injured, but when. Injuries are simply part of the game, as I have heard time and again from participants, often accompanied by a shrug of their shoulders. However, some injuries are simply too severe to recover from. When the physical toll becomes too much, many rodeo athletes face not just the end of their careers, but also a crisis of identity and mental health. Mental health crises are a serious issue in rodeo, driven by the moral code not to talk about problems and not showing pain, but possibly also linked to the high rates of concussions, which was a big topic a few years ago in NFL, so in American football. In some cases, this can lead to severe depressions and even suicide, so like with this case from this Canadian bull rider. So let's get to my last point. What does rodeo have to do with Trumpism? Trumpism is a relatively vague term and difficult to define precisely. However, for the purpose of this analysis, I suggest that Trumpism can be partly understood as a set of certain values, but also as a mode of performative identity politics. The two dimensions will guide my brief discussion of how rodeo relates to Trumpism. On the one hand, rodeo aligns with Trumpism through shared conservative values, such as toughness and competition, values that are not only celebrated but physically embodied in the arena, like I showed. And as a result, like Trumpism, the rodeo emphasizes a world of winners and losers. So a loser is also a term which Trump loves to mention. And on the other hand, and that is the more interesting part here, I want to explore, certain rodeo events can be understood as identity performances, public displays of a threatened rural life that mirror the logic of Trump's populist rhetoric. These performances often involve stark us versus them distinction, resistance to perceived liberal and urban elites, and the celebration of defiant shared identity, one that is dominantly white, Christian, and male. And one such identity performance is the Cody Night Rodeo, which I attended regularly during my fieldwork. Unlike smaller, and I want to talk now about this, the special rodeo, unlike smaller, more community-oriented rodeos that take place on the weekends in small communities, the Cody Night Rodeo is held every evening throughout the summer in the tourist town of Cody, Wyoming. The town is named after Buffalo Bill Cody and calls itself the World Capital Rodeo because it's, I think, 95 days in a row, every evening a rodeo. So, designed as a showpiece of authentic Western culture, it attracts a large audience of American and international tourists on their way to Yellowstone National Park. Like you can see, Cody is the eastern entrance city to Yellowstone, so it's a tourist town and everybody. So in the summer months, you just see RVs and everything. So, the many visitors turn this rodeo into a space in which conservative identity is not only lived but also explicitly staged for an external audience. At first glance, the Cody Night Rodeo appears to follow the common patriotic script: the national anthem, a prayer, the American flag. But the performance goes further. A poem titled "Why We Stand" is recited as an indirect criticism of the kneeling protest during NFL games and the Black Lives Matter movement in general. Another example is the question the announcer asked the audience at the beginning of the show. So he asked, "Do you agree that despite all its flaws, America is still the freest and greatest country in the world?" Of course, this question is not intended to trigger a debate, so it is part of the performance and an invitation to agree loudly and visible. In addition to the announcer, there's a clown. So clowns are always part of a rodeo, so the rodeo clown, maybe somebody heard about that. So it goes back to the circus at the beginning of the 20th century. So he is also a prominent figure in shaping the political tone of the event. He frequently makes political and sexist and sometimes even racist jokes targeting figures like Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, or residents of liberal states such as California. So I visited that last year, the last time, so I don't know what kind of jokes he does now since Biden, but maybe he still does about Biden, I don't know. So these performances do not merely entertain, they reinforce a specific worldview through humor. This makes the arena a space in which political polarization becomes part of the show. Coming to the end, so one short explanation for this heightened political tone, which is quite unusual for public events in the US, is that many within the rodeo community feel attacked or marginalized, like many others in rural America. So also they were, all people I was talking with were Trump supporters, Trump fans, MAGA hats and everything, so that was quite common there. And they experienced increasing pressure from animal rights activists, feel alienated by growing public discourse around gender, LGBTQ rights and political correctness. These developments are perceived as a direct threat to their value and way of life. As a response, many feel the need to assert their worldview more openly and defiantly. In this context, Trump's aggressive resistance to liberal agendas make him not only an appealing figure but also a source of affirmation, someone who validates their identity and encourages them to speak and act accordingly. So, thank you very much. Thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.